Mike went off, okay. Need a motion to act on these? Motion by Sharon, seconded by Betty. Does anyone have any comments that would correct any of the minutes or substitute something that they feel was misinterpreted? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? No nays? It's unanimous. We'll move on to our first order of business here with the informational items, and Brian Johnson from our sanitary district. We had a couple pages from them, and
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions. I see the January minutes. January seems like a long time ago, so it's been pretty busy the last few weeks, but happy to entertain any questions, and thank you as always for having me.
I don't know about how the sanitary district feels, but I feel pretty good for the weather we've had in January and February. I think we've seen much worse weather.
Indeed.
Any questions for Brian? Okay, Brian, thanks a lot. And Mark Little is going to be next for us with our facilities master plan and so forth. Mark, how's it going?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple positive things. First of all, the new public defender space construction is well underway. The area has all been demoed. The demolition is complete. They've been working up in the ceiling areas, the new up above there with new HVAC systems, and actually I was down there this morning and they're laying out walls, so they're getting ready to put up steel studs down there. So that is moving right along. The IT space demo started about a week ago. Took us a while to get everybody out of there and everything out of the computer room. Took us several weeks to get that done, but that's well underway. That demo is going to take more time. The IT space, especially the computer room, it's a very set way we have to do it to keep the existing systems that are running in there protected from the heat and keep them cooled and keep the dust down. So there's a process we have to work through. But those two are currently, from what I can tell, on schedule, and we're looking at a end of July, I think early August timeframe to get those done if nothing comes up. So that's going well. We're another thing that I don't remember if I reported on last month, but we marked off the list is the boiler burner upgrade was all complete on the secondary boiler, and that is running very well. And from what I hear from Calvin, it's running very, very efficiently. He said the efficiency is unbelievable compared to the other boiler. We switched boilers back and forth on a month-to-month basis to make sure they're both functional and one becomes a backup. But he said it's running very well, so it'll be interesting to get a year's worth of data off of that new one to see how well efficient that is. And if you remember, Ameren paid for the cost of that burner upgrade, and it was about $94,000. So we'll take a look and see what the payback period is. We're still working with Midwest Engineering on several of our capital projects, waiting on the final details of that to come forward to go out for bid. And then we're working on several issues at the jail, which hopefully this week we'll get some POs out for to get some stuff fixed out there. We get some water softener issues and a few other things. So lots going on in the facility side right now. So any questions?
Mark, you had said at our special meeting something about the water softeners out of GDC.
Water softeners at the jail.
At the jail.
Right.
Okay.
We just got updated information bids on those today, so we'll be working through this week to get that moving. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you again, Mark.
Thank you.
Moving on, we've got 7 items here for our committee, and the very first one we need a motion on has to do with a bridge that we have been dealing with in other meetings and so forth. Could I have a motion on this, please? Motion by Betty, seconded by Sharon.
So the
you-
board approved this in December. We had an error when we did the original resolution. The funding should be coming out of the county motor fuel tax fund, not the county bridge fund. So this is just de-obligating out of the county bridge fund and re-obligating into the county motor fuel tax fund. And that is the way the budget was spelled out anyway. So just an error and just rectifying that.
Any questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Ayes have it. We'll move on. And the next item of business has to do with our annual seal coating and tilling, and we need a motion to put this on the floor by Terry, seconded by Sharon. Okay, which one of you two are going to take it? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our, for the newer folks on the board, this is annually, on behalf of the townships, we go out for bid letting for seal coating operations for the townships that opt to be part of this program. And we went out for bid earlier this month, early February, and in your packet it shows the townships that were part of this. We went out for bid. We had 3 companies bid, and two of the contractors were the successful bidders. This is out of the township motor fuel tax account, so this is essentially a pass-through fund. The county oversees the township motor fuel tax account for the townships, but it is their funding, and we are recommending that the contractors with the low bid be approved for this work, and I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
Questions for Amy? All those in favor of adopting the recommendation of this resolution signify by saying aye. Aye.
Mr. Chairman, I will abstain.
Okay, I understand. All those opposed? Ayes have it with one abstention. Mr. Kelch. All right, moving on to the next item, Old Galena Road, and I think this may be the last time we'll act on anything unless, some emergency comes up in the future and so forth. So I need a motion to act on this particular resolution. Mr. Kelch, seconded by Betty. All right, you guys have got it.
So the bid letting for Old Galena Road was held on January 20th. Project with the increased costs and things we've had since 2020. Estimate was at $7.5 million for that stretch of road. The bids came in very good, and the low bidder was $4.9 million, so that was excellent news for us. We were going to originally have to spend $3 million out of county funds for that project, and of that $3 million, out of that $3 million, we were going to use $2.7 million of our remaining rebuild funds. Now our new balance that we will owe is only $2,080,000. So we will have some rebuild money unspent. IDOT has really been pushing everybody to get their rebuild money spent as soon as possible. I was going to shift it to another project, but they made a recommendation that we utilize everything on Old Galena Road and essentially use it up and get it spent. So what they recommended we do, we had spent the design engineering, we had spent that out of regular motor fuel tax. So they're essentially doing a line item change. They're going from regular motor fuel tax to rebuild. So that's just an accounting thing. That will come out of rebuild. Then we'll take $2,080,000 of rebuild funds for the construction, and then that will leave us about $220,000 left over we can use for construction engineering. So essentially, this is going to allow us to use all the rebuild on the project, This is a amended resolution for IDOT to appropriate all the proper amount of money for design, construction, and construction engineering. This is also going to free up $920,000 of motor fuel tax funds we can use on a different project. And I didn't put it in your packet, but it also frees up $1.38 million in federal funds that we can use in other projects. So this is a great savings for the county. So we just need board action to do all of that.
Questions, Terry?
Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, just give me a quick thumbnail of the description of this rebuild of the Galena Road.
Okay, so this is going from Boy Scout Road to the roundabout, and then we're going to go from the roundabout out to 29. There's a little piece there. We're going to completely reconstruct it. All new pavement, curb and gutter, storm sewer. There will be a left turn lane added at the Mossville Grade School with new traffic signals. So it's essentially going to finish up the rest of that project, which we have done north and south of this so far.
And when is that scheduled to commence?
It should start in April of this year.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Jeff, is there any concerns you're going to do on that box culvert that keeps flooding out and then you get your sand in there? Is that going to be replaced?
That's on State Street. This
That's-
is off the project limits.
Okay, that's off the project.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's on State Street. So-
Oh, you're going 29. I was thinking of the
Yeah,
other.
go out the other way to 29, yes.
Okay.
This is over by Cat and School.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Mhm. Any other questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on to the next resolution. It's got to do with something that our highway department's been waiting for a long time, radios. And need a motion to get this on the floor by Betty, seconded by Danny Kelch. Okay, you got it, Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The radios at the highway department are older. We have some dead spots in the system. We're looking to upgrade to Starcom radios. This would make us compatible with the other first responders, the fire protection districts, and law enforcement folks. And then we could talk to each other if we had to. If it was an emergency, we could more easily communicate with each other. The cost for the radios, we're looking at getting 60 radios for the highway department fleet. The cost is $257,000 for that. That does not include the install. That is a different agenda item. We've been working with Motorola and the E911 board, using the same contractual entity to get the pricing on this. We were looking to finance this out of the matching fund over a 5-year period. And discussion with some of the finance folks, with the interest on this, we're looking to ask the general fund to upfront the cost of the radios, with the matching fund paying back to the general fund over a 5-year period with 0 interest. So we'd save about $45,000 in interest by not financing them and buying them up front. So that's kind of a nutshell what we have going on. Happy to try to answer any questions on this.
Go ahead, Jim.
Amy, I think you can answer it. I know I asked Scott this last week, but when you talk about $200-some thousand for radios, can you give an explanation of why you would need them with your work with first responders, so communicating? Just because when you talk about radios, I could get you a cell phone plan for a lot cheaper and give you a cell phone plan and have phones in everybody's trucks. So can you just, for everybody's knowledge, explain why Starcom radios would be needed?
Sure. So there's different channels on these radios, and if it was an emergency like a Washington tornado where the fire department had to reach homes but they couldn't get in, they could turn on the channel with the public works folks, and we could bring the snow plows out and clear the debris away, so they could access that. It's also on a regular basis in the winter time. If they have a call they need to get to and there's snow and ice, they can call us and we can kind of clear the path for them as we go in front of them. But it's so we have more communication between the different departments. Other counties in the area and other agencies also have the same STARCOM unit, so it's not just Peoria County first responders, it's also other counties within the area have the same. So it's kind of the standard in discussions with the 911 folks. This is the standard moving forward to eliminate some of these dead areas we have and have these group conversations if we need to.
Other questions? All those in favor of adopting this resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on to the next one, which is tied to the radios. Need a motion to put this on the floor. Motion by Terry, seconded by what? Yeah,
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Danny Couch. Okay. I thought I saw Terry's hand go up first, but maybe yours did, Danny. Okay, you got it, Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, the last item was to acquire the radios. This one is for the installation of the radios. This is through Supreme Radio. We've worked with this vendor for other radios throughout the county. Other agencies work with them as well to do the radios. They're local company. This would work in. They're working with Motorola to get, when they get the radios, they would install them, take the old ones out, put the new ones in, and set them all up. This is for $85,615. This is out of the matching fund, so we would pay this year, and then it would include any installation with respect to these radios. Happy to answer any questions on this.
No one with a question? Thank you, Amy. All those in favor of adoption of this resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. No nays, unanimous. Moving on, we have the annual one with Bradley University Civil Engineering Department, so I need a motion. Betty, second by Terry,
For the new
and you guys got it.
Sorry, Mr. For the new board members, since we've been working with Bradley University since 2008 to do a pavement management program, they hire students at civil engineering and construction students at Bradley University to go out and they inventory our highways. They have a random number setting. They go down a road, and the random number setting picks a spot down the road where they get out and they do inspections for cracks, potholes, alligator cracking, things like that. And they take all this data and put it into a database that's been created by the U.S. Department of Transportation. And they plug all this in for the system, and it comes up with what we call a pavement management system. Oh my goodness. PCI, sorry. Pavement Condition Index. Thank you, Amy. For all the roads. And so then we have an inventory of how our roads are doing from year to year basis. They go through every other year. So one year they'll do half the county, the next year they'll do the other half of the county. So our roads are getting done every 2 years, and we can keep track of how they're doing. We use this to decide what we need to do for overlays or seal coating, helps us decide those kinds of things. This year's agreement is for $29,275, and the funding will be coming out of the motor fuel tax fund.
Just to let the committee know, how many miles of roads do we have?
315.
315. And they're going to cover about half each year. Anyone with any questions? It also gives us a chance to work with potential engineers that might want to go to work for us if we can get them hired. Right, Amy?
We do, Mr. Chairman, I think. Amy, do we not have someone you're going to be hiring from Bradley that's going to be graduating?
Yes, we hope to hire one of our interns as a full-time civil engineer once he graduates later this year.
The program.
Okay. All those in favor of adoption of this resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Ayes have it. And thank you from the Highway Department because you do a lot of work for us. And we have a new category, which is the future, I think, in dealing with energy costs and so forth. And we need a motion to get this on the floor. Motion by Danny, seconded by Mr. Dillon. We don't want to miss you today, Mr. Dillon. So, Becca, you are full go on this.
Thank you.
In regard to our solar, so if you can help us out a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. So after discussion at previous meetings and with the supporting information in your packet, today I'm recommending approval of development agreement with local solar developer Hakatolo to include a power purchasing agreement for Highway and JDC. As a reminder, the power purchasing agreement allows for no capital outlay and allowing for investment in other projects while realizing significant reduction in utility costs with on-site green energy. Hakatolo would build, own, and operate the asset and be fully responsible for the maintenance and insurance of the behind-the-meter solar asset, selling that power back to us at a much reduced rate. The power purchasing agreement is a long-term agreement with the county having the ability to purchase the depreciated asset at approximately 5 years, 10 years, whatever we work into it, into the agreement. The proposed size for Highway is 95 kilowatts and 450 at JDC. Hakatolo does use local union electricians to construct the assets. I know that was a question previously. Through that development agreement included, they would be able to apply for the Illinois Solar for All program on our behalf, again with greater incentives to both, as both arrays are in environmental justice communities. In addition to working through interconnection with Ameren and permitting requirements to support that Illinois Solar for All application. So I'm happy to accept any question or take any questions, but at this point recommending approval of the development agreement and PPA.
Questions from the committee? Okay, go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you. So I know we had sort of discussed possibly purchasing those. Yeah, I know we said no upfront capital, but I thought there was some discussion in the last meeting that we could possibly just go ahead and purchase those. That's one question. The next one was, I see in there's an exclusivity period. My question would be, does this bind us to this company for future projects?
It is.
Go
It's
ahead.
exclusive to just those two properties, JDC and Highway. And in terms of purchase, that is an option. The recommendation was to not outlay any capital with us having the ability to purchase the depreciated asset at 5 years.
Anything else, Sharon? Yeah.
I know
yes.
that we had considered purchasing, so I just wanted to know which one was better. Is it better off just to lease those or to buy those outright?
I think to begin with, we had pretty much decided that we didn't want to, of course, spend the money and so forth. Jimmy, did you have a comment on this?
No, I'm in agreement with Sharon. we talked about in the last meeting, we had the power purchase agreement and us owning it. And there was some numbers given to us that would show like 1.3 million to build, 1.2 is what we'd get back in tax credits. Those aren't accurate numbers, but they're going off of there. And I know this is a staff recommendation of it, but I see in here where it says we purchase in 5 or 7 years, but you have no agreed upon purchase price for what it would be in 5 or 7 years. Where I'm just saying, where if we're leaving, the reason in this whole thing is the tax incentives and tax credits. And Hakatola is a fantastic company, so I'm not saying like I'm not to that, but when CEJA changed, it changed the rules of the game for federal governments or government agencies to receive the tax dollars. So I need to see a strong laid out math-wise. I know it's not putting up capital, but I know I've talked to a few members. We did have some green money put aside from the landfill a few years ago that would upfront a majority of that cost. And then what is our payback? Do we get, I know it has to be energized, then do we get those RECs all at once, or are those RECs paid back over years? I'm just not seeing the math other than saying it's going to save us up front. But if this gets built, produced, turned on, we're not outlaying money for a ton of time. And then I'm concerned about owning it at what price, and then us being, I know a business should run it and maintain it. That's probably better than what we do. But my concern is if we buy it in 5 or 7 years, do we know how to, on the flip side, own it, run it, maintain it? We talked about insurance policies and all of that last meeting. I don't see any of those numbers to know where my actual math should lead me to on this, other than saying no upfront money, which it's just a short-term upfront money, and then we get that money back and it can go back to other places. Those are the questions I want to know.
Yeah, so I do have the depreciated cost at 5 years, and for JDC it would be 120,000, and for highway it would be 25,000, which is what led me to the recommendation. It really doesn't, I mean, it behooves us to take the cost savings initially. The reason that part of that money is in there as well is if you see with the purchase, there's an additional payout at 15 years. And that is once those, with the Illinois Solar for All program, you're required to generate the solar, the solar renewable energy credits for a 15-year period. So there's a payout at the end of that 15-year period. So that payout is included in that depreciated cost at 5 years of 120,000 for JDC and 25,000 for highway, if that helps. In terms of insuring the asset, I do not have that number. I can get that number, but I do not have that number.
Well,
Jim?
and I appreciate staff's recommendation. I do. So I'm not trying to bash it or whatever, but I do believe that it's a policy decision of the Horseshoe to decide whether or not we own it or lease it. And I'm just curious of what other members' thoughts would be in that process.
Yes, Terry?
I'm of the same mind, Chairman Dillon, but I'm curious if in fact the purchase price should or should not be stipulated in the contract at 5 years, at 10 years, at certain levels of depreciation. It seems to me that this, with a tax credit attached to it, that solar panels, the system in and of itself, could fluctuate in value depending on the presence or absence of a tax credit. So the price of solar panels would likely go down if the government, the federal government, just chooses to lessen or lower or eliminate a tax credit. So I would be somewhat concerned about buying this at a predetermined price, especially when we're buying it in its later years. We're going to be, if we bought it at 10 years, we would probably have the remaining 15 of a lifespan of a typically 25-year lifespan of a solar panel. We're buying it in its most vulnerable state if we buy it at 10 or 12 years out. So I think there is some questions that should be answered, and I do agree with you that it's a horseshoe question, whether or not we want to own it, not own it, and what those costs might be.
Yeah.
So following up that, if we would have purchased it in say 7 or 10 years down the line, what is a decommissioning cost? And I know this is somewhat time sensitive due to the schedule that was given to us for the way the recs work and when they open, but I mean, if we go down the lease route, is it even logical for the county to even want to take the asset over? But then I'm also worried about if it gets sold to some private developer in 7 years, and then maybe rates go up, or we don't have a contract, or it's not maintained or taken care of it. I know under Hakatolo's ownership we won't have to worry about that, and I see in one of the costings it's about $6,800 to maintain one a year. I think what the cost was in there.
So what do you guys want to do? Terry?
One more point. I don't know if I understood the comment. I thought you mentioned insurance. If we own it, we would insure it. I assume that if Hakatolo owns it, they insure it.
Correct.
If that's,
Correct. Yeah.
if that's the case, you know, we would want to know, we would want to understand what are the costs of insuring it if we have some interest in purchasing it somewhere along the line. So identification of those costs to us, if I was doing this on my own house, I would ask all these same questions. So I kind of feel like we need to get a little bit more detail in the answers. I'm not against it at all. I just want to make sure we're covered.
And that's what I wanted to say. Do you want more time on this?
Well, I know Jason's here, so I don't know if Jason would want to speak to some of the stuff that maybe, because this isn't the first one that he's ever developed by any means. So some of the questions that we might have, maybe he could answer. And I still personally think that this needs to go forward under the thing that I don't think it's unreasonable to get some of these questions answered in the next week, that we couldn't have a meeting to vote on this one prior to the full board meeting. And there's probably other board members that would be interested in hearing about, because whether we own this or whether we're in a lease agreement with Hakatolo, this is what we should be doing to help lessen our energy costs. So this is a good thing for the county one way or the other. So I'm no way opposed to it. I just am trying to understand it better.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the question around insurance, you're typically looking at somewhere in the realm of 15 cents a watt annually for, and that, so there's two forms of insurance. There's liability coverage and then property coverage. And those two things combined typically, and liability under the county's umbrella might be a little bit different. For us, it's about a 15 or 20 cent per watt cost to insure both liability and property. And so in this case, you've got, what, 600,000 watts, give or take. So 10 cents would be 6,000. And, I'm sorry, either 1.5 cents or 2 cents, not 15 or 20, I'm sorry. So it would be under a 600,000 kilowatt or 600,000 watt system, you'd be looking at roughly $12,000, $15,000 a year to insure it. What was the other question? So I think you also had a question about maintenance is very similar cost, a little bit higher, but very similar. You had a question about how the value is determined for. So under the contract, there's two ways that you can determine fair market value, and because the tax credit is a part of the transaction, this is guidance that comes from the IRS on how you can determine fair market value. There's two ways. You can have an arm's length transaction or like an appraisal done of something of that nature, or you can use the net present values that remain in the contract. And so the 125,000 and 20 or 120 and 25 that Becca referred to is based on the net present value. That's the way that we've determined that we calculate fair market value at the end of these transactions. It saves everybody the cost of having to get an appraiser involved, and we've even gone so far in past negotiations to enter into like a memorandum of understanding or a letter of intent that says this is how we're going to determine fair market value. It's important to know that though theoretically that cannot be predetermined, again, because the IRS requires if you use a tax credit, you can't have an automatic payout calculated at the front of the transaction, because then it's almost like you're misusing the tax credit, so to speak. So it is the tax code law requires you to utilize a fair market value transaction, and so that's why we use fair market value, because we know net present value, because we know what that net present value is, because we have a long-term agreement and we can net present those cash flows, and that's our buyout. So that's how we determine fair market value. Mr. Dillon, I'm not sure what question, I forget what question you're. Decommissioning costs. So we would get a decommissioning bond as a part of the installation of this project, and it could just be transferred. The rules of a decommissioning bond is to set the cost to decommission today, and then you have to update it every so often. I think it's 7 or 10 years, because obviously costs change over the long life of the agreement. But we would have a decommissioning bond that, if sold, could be transferred.
So, Jason, unless I'm misunderstanding it, so like on a construction bond, that bond wouldn't actually be for decommissioning it. It'd only be if Hawkatolo had gone out of business and left, and the county was stuck with the property. That would be the only way the bond's collectible, right? Not actually the bond would not be collectible just for us to decommission.
Yep.
Really?
Yep. That's how they're set up, and they're purchased on the early stages of the bond, and it's held in place until a time of decommissioning, and then if Hawkatolo doesn't decommission it, if Hawkatolo's responsible for decommissioning it, then Hawkatolo would, and if Hawkatolo did not perform, then the county would have the ability to pull that bond and pay for the decommissioning. Correct. I guess I don't know exactly how the mechanics of that would work, but I would think that yes, it would have to be a part of the negotiation, right? There's a cost associated with it, so we would just have to consider what that cost is for the remaining life of that bond, and then it would be a part of the transaction.
So if the cost was $100,000, you're basically putting $100,000 aside, and it's being set aside for that.
Yep, for the decommissioning.
Okay. I was just thinking of a normal construction bond where if I don't perform the work, then they can take the bond to get paid, but not in the sense that I'm putting the money aside for future decommissioning.
Yeah, it's the same concept, whereas, again, if Hawkatolo's tasked with decommissioning and we're unable to, for whatever reason, then you can execute that bond and pay for the decommissioning. It's for tear down as opposed to construction.
Go ahead, Jim.
And is that, without having seen that per se, is the bond written into the contract that is transferable to? I know you can maybe can't say, I would just say that I think before any agreement, if we do go down the lease road, that I know we review that contract, but have the state's attorney review the bond also to make sure that it's,
So,
is it?
So, be it further resolved,
well, the master development agreement that I think is a part of your resolution is essentially a document that says, okay, we agree to work with Octolo to get to a final negotiation of a PPA, which obviously that PPA would be required by you to have a decommissioning bond attached to it, right, as a part of an exhibit. So if, and the real purpose of that is that of the master development agreement is that we really kind of need to start spending money today in order for to achieve our timelines. And so I think we all agree that an arrangement is of interest, or if you, I guess if you approve the resolution, then we would have a master development agreement in place, Hocktola would, which would give us a sense of security to go spend the money to get interconnection started and zoning approvals and things of that nature, which would have some cost to us. And then once we get to a final PPA negotiation, then all that stuff would be added in.
Jim?
I guess I would add for the packet going forward too. On 123, we actually had the timeline of everything where you talk about having to start the process and the rec credits, when interconnection agreements, financing, construction, and everything. I think that would be helpful. I didn't see this. It'd be page 89 on last month's packet, but I didn't see it on this month's packet. Just the time frames for board members that haven't sat through 2 meetings discussing. And I say that and just doing that, I know that we've talked about it and answered a lot of questions, but there's, 6 of us out of 18, so there's 2/3 of the board that this will all be new to for discussion purposes.
Have a special meeting before the board meeting?
Scott, do we have any other things that would have to come prior?
Not at this time. The only potential would be if executive committee does something with the county administrator's employment agreement after tomorrow's meeting. But that obviously would be a quick and quick meeting itself as well.
For the administration too, so if we did purchase this, I know that might not have been an option that would looked at, but for the 1.2 million, what projects would have to be cut, or we would use that? Was it 750,000 or was it 500,000?
So it was 500,000. A portion of that you appropriated for the HHS campus back in 2019 or 2020. That was the first money into that project. In terms of what capital projects would be deferred, we could definitely generate a list for you in terms of what that looks like. It also, fund balance is also such that if you wanted to do this from the general fund reserves, you could do that, and then the recs could then be deposited back into the general fund, depending on the timeliness of how quickly the recs get reimbursed. I think, Mr. Dillon, that was a question maybe that you asked early on in the debate, and maybe Jason could answer that for the committee as well, so that you've got a better idea of how quickly those recs would come back to either them through the PPA or through us if we go the other route.
Yeah. So when it's energized, once it's energized, then there's a part 2 submission to the program. So we'd have to submit all the remaining documents, and then from there you're looking at somewhere between 180 to 270 days before the payout would happen. So 6 months or 6 or 9 months usually when you get your money back.
What's the track record for SREC approval? Just to get the project moving before you probably buy a lot of equipment. Don't you have an application to the state? How long is it taking them to get those approved?
So they have an annual procurement cycle, which will happen. Sometimes it happens in June. Sometimes it happens in July. It's usually about that 6 or 7 or 8 month of the year time frame. So there'll be a significant amount of work that we'll need to do to prepare to apply, and then in June or July, whenever it happens, we would get approval probably in September. And then once we have approval, we have rec contract. That rec contract gets allocated to the project, and then we build the project, and then we submit the final documents that show that it's been built, and that's when they execute the time frame to pay out.
Jim?
One last question. I know it was asked in another meeting, but I haven't heard the answer. So adding these, even though they're going to be used for this facility, in no way affects the current contract that we have with Trajectory for Peoria Solar 1 and Peoria Solar 2 for interconnection agreements?
100% correct, Mr. Dillon. Those are community solar projects that are in front of the meter, so the intent is to provide solar to the grid in economically disadvantaged communities. The subject of this resolution is exclusively behind the meter for our own properties.
I mean, unless there's opposition, I mean, I've heard some stuff from Jason that answered some of the questions I would know. I mean, maybe staff's recommendation of leasing is the best option. I just wanted to answer some questions about owning it or decommissioning or stuff. So, I mean, I don't want to hold up anything, whether or not, if this board wants to go forward with this today, I'm fine with that.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask, are there any unanswered questions that we need from any of the committee members? And if so, what are they, so that we can accurately articulate those and get responses to you?
Jim?
So if we vote on this today, then can I make the request that, Jason, that a presentation is given with all these slides for the board during that night, so that there's a complete understanding from all 18 of us of what we're entering into, instead of just having it on for an up-down vote? And
Well, I mean, we could vote on it here but then when the resolution comes up, we could have the presentation. Rather than have a special meeting, I don't think we need to have a special meeting of the committee. We would just put it on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, we'll, based on the debate and Mr. Dillon's request for our presentation, we'll put this on the regular agenda versus the consent agenda, presuming it gets out of committee.
If there are no more questions, then all those in favor of supporting this resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. All those that are opposed to this resolution signify by saying nay. Unanimous vote. This will be put on the regular agenda with the presentation by Jason. Moving on, we have public comment. Do we have any public comment? All right. Miscellaneous, and I was going to ask Jeff, how long we been tied to this old Galena Road project? What, about 3 years or 4 years or 3 years? 3 years. So Terry's getting it all finished, and he's only been on this board, just a few months. But old Galena Road, you've got it done, whereas it was taking your predecessor a long time. Anybody else with miscellaneous? Good discussion, guys. I appreciate it. I felt like I was in a tennis match, going back and forth between Terry and Jim. It's good. It's good for the county. All right. No further business, then this meeting is adjourned.